Thanks so much for joining us today. We will be discussing the exciting exhibition Elias Sime Tightrope and its many iterations. We were thrilled to be able to originate the exhibition in fall of 2019, and we're happy to say that it's still going strong. It's on view now at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And it's been an interesting journey. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today are different approaches and iterations of the show, as well as how we all contended with the pandemic and changed our tact and our approach as a result of that, which is kind of an interesting discussion to have. We were so thrilled that the show was able to continue. We extended it 3 times so that every venue would be able to have the exhibition on view, but we're really thrilled with the outcome. So we're going to start this conversation by each of us talking a little bit about the installation and our different approaches, as well as the pandemic. And then we are going to be in dialogue with each other, followed by the opportunity for Q&A at the end. So please put your comments and questions in the chat box, and we will be monitoring them and have a conversation at the end. So I'm going to jump in by just showing some images from the installation. Marjorie. So there's no images yet up there. Can't share my screen. Do you know where it is? And I can hear you, Alexander. I can hear you whispering. Well, in the meantime, we can talk a little bit about the show being open right now. So Silvia, oh, here we go. Here's our presentation. The joys of Zoom. Terrific. Thank you. So as you can see, the exhibition was, like I mentioned, debuted at the Wellin, went to the Akron Art Museum, the Kemper Museum, and is now on view at the Royal Ontario Museum. You can go to the next slide. And each of us approached it in a really unique and dynamic way. So I'm going to talk about the Wellin's iteration of the show. You can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I really wanted to encapsulate in the curatorial aspect of the show was having this space quite open, more open than it's ever been. There's a couple of walls in the space, but there are no rooms. And the idea of all the artwork being able to be in dialogue with each other. And I tried to look at as much of the work in person in advance as possible. But obviously when the work comes into the gallery, there's always that kind of unique magic that happens that you want to be receptive to and think about and be able to move things around a little bit. And you'll also see there's a still right there from the video that we commissioned. Brett Novak went to Ethiopia and filmed Elias in his studio, and the video is all Elias in his own words. And that was something that was also really important for the artists to be able to speak for themselves. One of the exciting things that happened when I was in Ethiopia meeting with Elias was the discovery of the ceramic works, which you see on the platform in the center there, which I was not aware of until we were meeting together. And it set up a really interesting dialogue with the rest of the work and is really an extension of his broader practice. You could go to the next slide. This just shows some of those ceramic works called bareness, which actually are these gendered pots of varying sizes and patina. Which were a really fun part of the show. And again, looking at these tableaus, which are made in a very unique fabrication, which I know that that Teresa is going to talk about. So I'm going to let her talk about that when we get to that. You can continue on. Just some more views of the show. Again, trying to keep it really open and airy. Next slide. Some of the works that were made specifically for the show are this work in the middle here. There were 2 works made completely of computer keys that from the 90s that Elias incorporated into these brand new works that debuted in the show and have traveled with the exhibition. You can go to the next slide. Just another wonderful view of this incredible show. And then we also put the work in dialogue with some of his earlier stitched canvases. And it's interesting because I know that some of the iterations intersperse some of the early works with the more contemporary works. But for me, I kind of set it aside because I wanted to talk about these as being a precedent for the current work. You can move on. So one of the exciting things that we did here at the Wellin was we worked with Elias. We had Elias come and collaborate with our students to create a site-specific work. And when Elias came, he was really inspired by the Saunders peonies, which is a very specific peonies developed by a Hamilton faculty person, chemistry professor. In the early 20th century, he was really inspired by that. And you can go to the next slide. And this was the final composition. This piece was on the museum terrace for a year. And it was a really exciting project that our students had the opportunity to work directly with an artist of Elias's stature. So that was something specifically that we did. And then I'm going to pass this on to Teresa to talk about the iteration of the exhibition at the Akron Art Museum.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for inviting me to be a part of today's conversation, for your Wellin colleagues, for your work behind the scenes. And if any of my former Akron Art Museum colleagues are joining us today, thank you so much for all of the hard work that went into making Elias Sime Tightrope possible in Akron. My name is Teresa Bemnister. I'm currently Associate Curator at the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts in Little Rock, Arkansas, formerly Curator of Exhibitions at the Akron Art Museum, where I was the presenting curator for Elias Sime Tightrope. Just a little bit of background information on Akron. It's located in Northeast Ohio, about 45 minutes drive south of Cleveland. It serves a metro population of around 700,000 people. And the museum houses a collection of around 6,000 modern and contemporary artworks from around the world. Half of those are photographs. Next slide, please. The Akron Art Museum opened Elias Sime Tightrope on February 29th, 2020. And if you check the museum's website, you'll see that May 24th is listed as the end of the exhibition, but it effectively closed to the public in mid-March when the COVID shutdown began in Ohio. So Tightrope was really only on display in Akron for 2 weeks. When it became clear that the safety regulations for the state of Ohio would require the museum to remain closed past the ending date for the exhibition, Akron's deputy director asked the museum's prep staff to begin deinstalling the works using social distancing protocols and packing them up, preparing them to ship to Kansas City. We also paired the exhibition with a small show of works from the museum's permanent collection that featured found objects. You can see one of those, a sculpture by Lucky de Bellevue in the left corner of this slide. Next slide, please. One thing I thought I'd point out quickly is that the background colors that we used in Akron were quite a bit different than those at the Wellin. I know, Tracy, you were thinking about kind of the earthy relationships with Sime's work. We really pulled out the bright colors that were apparent in the electronic components that he used. So although Akron Art Museum has close relationships to all the nearby institutions of higher learning, unlike the Wellin, our primary audience is not academic. So we adjusted and built upon the interpretive strategies in place at the Wellin, most notably by drafting chat labels using the research in Karen and Sue's catalog essays. We also planned some exhibition programming, which included curator-led tours and a talk with Elias Sime that was scheduled for March 29th, but clearly did not happen because that was in the middle of Ohio's lockdown period. Next slide, please. This is a close-up view of the work Tightrope 9 While Observing, which dates from 2018 and is made of reclaimed components, electronic components, and braided wire. And I really wanted to include this slide because I suspect that some of the folks joining us today have not yet had the chance to experience Sime's work in person. And the slide illustrates how difficult it is to capture the incredible textures and details of his work in photographs. His work is best seen in person from multiple viewpoints, from far away, so you can really take in the color and the compositions, and then from close up, so you can see the individual components that make up his work. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So preparing for this talk gave me the opportunity to relive the early days of the pandemic, which was a period of great upheaval, I'm sure, for all of us, and of great loss for many. But I have to say that reconsidering Sime's work following a year and a half of this worldwide health crisis has really allowed me to make some sense of the pandemic and the ways that it's made the symbiotic global relationship that we're all a part of impossible to ignore. And that's one of the things that Sime's work is very much about. The materials that he uses embody a history that spans global supply chain networks, many of which were disrupted by the pandemic. And the only tour that I led of this exhibition, that's something that I talked about during that tour. Little did I know that the exhibition would close to the public 4 days later. The travel and shipping that we rely on to do business worldwide has also, in the case of COVID, spread not only goods, like Sime uses, but disease, unfortunately. His work is also very much about our relationship to technology and how screens mediate our personal interactions and our lived experiences. And he doesn't mean that in a judgmental or critical way. He just wants his viewers to stop and think about their relationships to technology. And I have to say that our relationships to technology have changed so drastically in the past year and a half. And screens have really become the safest way to connect to each other when being face-to-face means that we could possibly make each other sick. I really wonder if we would all be on the Zoom call together, sharing this scholarship and ideas and experiences across geographical boundaries, if it weren't for the way that the pandemic caused our relationship to technology to change so drastically. So in conclusion, I want to say that I do think that Sime's work seems particularly suited, very well suited for this moment in time. Thanks.
Hello, I'm next. I'm Erin Judges. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City. I had the fantastic opportunity of being able to work with Tracy and this amazing group of curators throughout the process of this exhibition. And I just want to give Tracy a big round of applause for her concept and idea for engaging with this exhibition, knowing that so many exciting works have been placed recently around the world of Sime's work, and kind of really giving people a better understanding and knowledge of his work through this process. I also want to thank Elias and Meski for always being so open and with their continued communications with us throughout this difficult time as well, and just their upbeat attitude about the shifts we needed to make for this exhibition. Next slide. We started our journey with talking about Elias Sime with this long, beautiful landscape of a tightrope piece that you see in the background on the wall. This really sparked our interest in joining this project, and this has been part of our collection and featured in a major 25th anniversary exhibition, and we were delighted to be able to have it travel with this exceptional groups of work. And I also want to make mention that, you know, there was a lot of planning and scenarios that went into this. You know, it was very exciting for us to touch base with all of the relative institutions related to this project, and really, you know, every week or so, or every 2 weeks when we met, the schedule was changing and things were shifting. We were getting some information about how shipping was going to work, who was staying open, who was closing, who was going to install and deinstall. And, you know, it was such a it was a challenging time, but it was also a really good time to kind of be on your toes and learn different ways of coordinating and rescheduling that, you know, are able to serve the work in that it is allowed to be installed still, and people were still able to see it in certain capacities. We actually received the work from the Akron Museum and began installing sometime in the late spring, early summer, and we had an extended, much longer extended period of installation than we normally would, which, given that we weren't, there was a very, very, very small group of us, safely and social distanced as much as we possibly could be, installing this exhibition. And so we had more time to do this, which really gave us an opportunity to see how the works were reflecting against one another and how they were engaging with the space. Next slide. Our space is very wide and kind of open, has a very big ceiling. And so these works really kind of shine in a space like this where they can kind of take over walls. And one of the things I do want to make mention is I was very happy that Tracy included the ceramics work, because Kansas City is a ceramics town. There's many institutions here in Kansas City that support ceramic arts. And so it was such a nice addition for us to be able to kind of incorporate that media into this particular exhibition. One of the things that was exciting for us as well is that we were able to do a live tour with Tracy on one of our very first Instagram live tours, which gave us really good insight into a lot of the materials, a lot of the process, a lot of how her ideas really came into fruition in different institutions. We also recorded a guided meditation series. I mean, who doesn't need a little bit of peace of mind during a moment like this? So we had a guided meditation leader be in the space, and everything was virtual, everything was on Zoom. We were lucky to join together Mesky and Elias Sime and Tracy for a Zoom panel discussion at the time, which was a very exciting use and a new use of our technology that we continue to use today, actually. We were able to bring in artists from the community who had some sort of connection with the work that they were doing with Elias's work. And so that was really important for us. And we made best of our programming usages. So we opened the museum officially in October, though. So there was a big gap in between there where, you know, really the only people seeing this exhibition was staff. And, you know, having that kind of time with an exhibition is a luxury, but, you know, it was more important for us to be able to have people finally come and see the exhibition, which had a great, you know, a great reception, and people were very excited to be able to really see kind of in person some of those elements of technology unpacked that they've been using this entire length of time and difficult situation, and really see how someone who understands how technology is precarious, and it does kind of teeter on that tightrope of being something that's useful and something that's difficult at the same time, but something that we all have to maneuver around and really learn how to engage with it the best we can and what works for us. Next slide. These are just a couple of views of the exhibition space, just to give you a sense of what it looks like at the Kemper Museum. Next slide. We chose a green that was somewhere in the middle of all the greens. It's a color that we don't typically use in the museum space, and we were really excited. I think one of the things that I felt really connected to with Elias's work and in speaking with him was his history of travel and how a lot of the landscapes that he has interacted with are reflective in a lot of the works that he has on view in the exhibition. Next slide. It was also an opportunity for us to connect with collectors in Kansas City. So we've got a couple of works in the exhibition from one of our local collectors as well, which is very important to us to be able to kind of continue to make those connections. Next slide. A little close-up of our kind of very exciting work that we love to take care of at the museum, and that is a joy for us to have, and I think it's really impactful for people to see. Next slide. And finally, you know, some people walking around the space with masks on and just kind of looking at a different view of the exhibition space. I think that's my last slide. Great, thank you.
Silvia, you're up. I think you're muted.
Okay, here
Yeah.
I am. Sorry. Thank you. So I want to echo everybody's thanks to Tracy and her team for putting together this exhibition and for organizing this very interesting panel. It's so good to see all the people who've been involved in this project and who have been taking care of this exhibition one after the other. So I'll go right into my slides, please. So the ROM is the last venue for Elias Sime Tightrope. And we just reopened last week, and we're really thrilled and excited that the Toronto public can finally come to the museum after many months and encounter the work of Elias Sime in person. We were supposed to host this exhibition last September. So again, great thanks to the Wellin Museum for patiently renegotiating all the loans in the show to allow us to show it in Toronto and in Canada. And this was a monumental task that we are very grateful that you could do for us. And we're also really excited to have had the opportunity in a way to work on this exhibition, as Teresa was mentioning, in this really strange time of increased presence of technology in our life. So as a museum that is not necessarily a contemporary museum, we are a strange museum of art, culture, nature in Toronto. We had to approach this exhibition somewhat in a more holistic way, or picking at different strands, I would say, than all you other museums, because we don't necessarily invite or have a public that it's always used to engage with contemporary art. So for us, the work of Elias was an interesting challenge to work with because of the different themes and ideas that are embedded in his work and that can be somehow teased out or thought about when engaging with his practice and aesthetic. Next slide. So these are shots from the installation at the ROM. The ROM has this 15-year-old edition by Daniel Libeskind, which creates a very interesting yet somewhat challenging exhibition space. And I must say that it was such a pleasure to install the work of Elias in this space, because it's powerful, large-scale work that really shines in a gallery that tends to often dwarf other type of works. And so the strength and the beauty of Elias's work really was able to come across in a powerful way in the space that we had. We did not show the ceramics, but we have most of the works that were in all other locations. And next slide. And one of the ways we approached this exhibition was to engage communities, or at least a number of advisors, in thinking of the best way to present the work, and to present the work, as I was saying earlier, to a public that it's not always used to engage with contemporary art. So some of the ideas that came across as we were discussing with our advisors were, on the one hand, to really give prominent space to Elias's work, to Elias's poetics, to his vision of the world. Elias is a very philosophical individual, and he sees his art and his presence in the world in a sort of continuum, which is really about connectivity, of togetherness, of being one as humankind, but also in relationship to the earth. And so we have many, many quotes that we took from interviews, from the beautiful catalog that the Wellin produced, from conversations that I had with Elias, but also from the video that was produced for the exhibition, and really highlighted some of the, let's say, key elements of Elias' poetics in the space. Next slide. We also try to use, again, the challenging architecture of the gallery that creates a sort of separate ending space in one of the corners of the exhibition to connect Elias's practice in the exhibition with what he is also engaged with in Ethiopia, which is the Zoma Museum, which very much is a continuum again of the way he sees his art making. And we took some elements of Zoma, these beautiful carved adobe walls that he sculpts to create the patterns of this room where we're showing the video that the Wellin created. Next slide. And we also created an audio tour where we invited a number of individuals from the community here in Toronto. Again, not necessarily contemporary art people. So we have some scientists, some authors, poets, people who are engaging with the world from different angles and perspectives, who engage with technology, who engage with environmental issues, to react to Elias's work and somehow respond to the work from their specific vantage point. And this was a way, we hope, this is an audio tour that people can access and download as they enter the gallery. There's a QR code, and so if you have a phone, you can access the tour. It's really a way to somehow demystify the opacity of contemporary art that sometimes is really seems difficult to access, and really providing different entry points to this work, which in a way can be so so timely and so close to what we're all experiencing, and so relevant for this time. And I think that is my last slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Silvia. So we're also thrilled to have Karen, who contributed a fantastic essay to the catalog. Again, deepening the scholarship. This is the first scholarly publication of Elias's work, and it's interesting that Silvia sort of ended on the materiality of the work and the accessibility of it. And I know that the concept of vital materialism is really central to your argument in the essay. So Karen, take it away.
Thank you so much. So yes, I would actually, it makes great sense for me to follow Silvia. And but before I do, I just want to thank, first of all, Elias for creating this fantastic work that has inspired us all to be together today, as well as Mesker Mesegwed, who's been his intellectual collaborator and partner in so many things, as well as Tracy, the visionary who brought us this exhibition, the entire team of the Wellin, and also Jim and Jane Cohen at the Cohen Gallery, who have been really instrumental in helping throughout this project. So that being said, I'm coming at this differently in that I'm a curator who has worked with Elias, but did not work on this particular exhibition and presenting it to the public, but have participated in the catalog, which is a form that will get to continue this exhibition into the future as a resource, we hope, for people. And I'm just one of the contributors that include Meski and Elias and Tracy and Smooth and Zawi at MoMA. So next slide, please. And one of the great sort of benefits of actually getting to be in the book is that it gives you a chance to really spend a lot of time with the artist's words, which is something that Silvia just spoke about, but also give a sense of the context that from which these works emerged. And one of the things that you often will hear when people speak about Elias's work is it is sometimes referred to as recycled or other kinds of ways of trying to describe the repurposed materials with which he works. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, because Elias really does not consider his work recycling at all. And in fact, what he says, and this is a quote, is that I transform things I find into art. I prefer things that have touched or been in contact with people. And that really is it for him. As he says, his creating artwork is a journey, and the journey begins the moment that he enters into an engagement with it. So an object has had a journey for a long time. So if you think about something like a cell phone, somebody mined that copper that goes into the wire, somebody created the plastic casing that's going to go around the wire, somebody drove the truck and offloaded the spools of wires that go into the electronics factories. There have been so many touches along the way. And when he's thinking about the motherboards and so forth, he's talked about that moment being the time that he connects with the joy somebody felt when they opened their box with their brand new cell phone. And so he's thinking about all of these histories and how all of these are connected. And so bringing that together for him has often been inspired by the Mercato market, which is here in the center of Addis Ababa. And so he buys things from the open source market, but if you go to the market, it's really important to actually realize that it has its own fascinating spatial logic. So out on the streets, you might find people breaking broken electronics apart to get to the wires and these different materials that can be repurposed. But you go into the shops like here, where the Samsung Mobile, and it's going to be multi-stories, and like on the first floor will be the brand new computers, and then you go up the stairs and the next floor is going to be somebody fixing the computers, and you go up a floor above that and it's somebody who's selling the used parts. And so there's this ongoing life of all of these materials. And then next slide, please. Oh, no, there's one in the middle. There we go. Okay, and so then Elias is sourcing all of this material and he's bringing it back to his studio. And another thing that's completely kind of crazy and wonderful about Elias is the fact that his studio is anywhere that he is. So it can be his yard, his Meski's driveway, it can be this particular space, which is just attached to Zoma Museum, which Silvia just mentioned too, which is a museum space that I'm going to show you another slide from, that he and Meski actually have realized together. But it can take him years to gather these parts. It's not like he just found them. And he talks about how with his first Tightrope exhibition, it actually took him 15 years to source the materials that he needed to get the right colors and textures and so forth. And so what you see here is literally stacks and stacks of electronic components waiting to be broken apart, and bags filled with keys, computer keyboard keys. And you'll even see like crushed bits in the dirt around his space. And he says he doesn't want anything to be touched. He doesn't want people to clean it up. He wants to feel that energy when he comes back the next day. He wants to see these materials always anew. And so his work is constantly being reinvented, and he pushes very hard against complacency. And that's one of the reasons that you see this extraordinary richness, from the ceramics to the stitched works, to the button works, to works that he's made with plastic bags, to the electrical wires and components that he's best known for today. He's constantly trying to see them in new ways and then reinvent them in new ways. Next slide, please. And this is certainly something that comes to the fore at Zoma Museum. And so this is a museum space that is not a museum in the same way as these venues that we've just been talking about, where it's a series of gardens, it's an eating space, it has a school space, it does have a display space. But for Elias and Meski, this is really a performance art piece in and of itself. You can see here the adobe walls that Silvia just mentioned, that he hand molded these walls using techniques that he learned from Garage and related communities in Ethiopia. That is part of what he considers to be really vital to his work, is looking at the power of these materials, and that any material from hay and and mud to these electrical components continues to have this vital materialism, that it is part of this environment that we live in. And so you can see how he sees the building of and maintenance of spaces like Zoma to be integral parts of his practice. Next slide, please. Oh, there was one in the middle. And so while we didn't get to have this fantastic show at my museum, I did want to show a work that we do currently have on view by Elias, in part because it really makes the extraordinary message of his restless spirit and how he is constantly creating. So this is a piece that's called We Are All Green, and it actually runs across 4 walls at the entrance to the museum. And it speaks to all of these issues that folks have touched on. And he says that the title We Are All Green comes from, on the one hand, the fact that in an idealistic spirit, we are beyond black, white, we are all one humanity, we are all green. So there's that element to it. There's also the fact that, as he says, electronic materials come from the earth. And so we tend to see technology as something separate from the environment. But in fact, it is all part of one world. And so we are all green because these materials are all part of the same system in which we inhabit. And that we need to also think about the benefits, the pros and the cons to connectivity. That on the one hand, these communications technologies make it possible to have Zooms and conversations from Addis Ababa to Kansas City, but at the same time, people are looking at their cell phones instead of at one another, and how we need to remember to touch one another. So that's why the personal touch is so central to him. And when you look at the piece, and you can't see it as clearly here, but the left 2 panels are all green, and they are convex. And then if you look at the right 2 panels, they become concave and have red berries in them. And so next slide, please. And so here's a detail of the convex side. So it's sort of like a cycle of life from the greening of spring to the fall of berries. But what I really wanted to point out with these particular works is you can see how in all of the earlier works that you've seen, the wood was, it was like a flat tile that Elias was adhering the keys and the motherboards and the wires and these other materials to. And what happened right at the time that the exhibition was being installed at the Wellin, actually, he started working on this commission for the Smithsonian, and he started carving the wood. And for one, it's just extraordinary the ability he has to be so productive, that his brain can handle all of these projects at once, that anyone's brain can handle all of these projects at once. But bringing this 3-dimensional component so strongly to the fore of really sculpting and modeling each and every tile, and then taking this technique of the braiding onto it. And you can see how he works with the rhythms of the braiding and braiding green and red wires together to get this sort of brown tonality, and how he's really playing with color in that way. And so I just wanted to speak a little bit to this, you know, to the wonders that are still to come beyond this project with his practice. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Karen. Yeah, just to note that the piece that's installed at Karen's museum came just after the Tightrope exhibition. So there, even since then, he has created more work. And what's so compelling about Elias is, as you can see from Karen's images, he is a collector. He is a collector of things. And he has many different types of collections, and those over time, as he becomes more engaged with them, they often end up in his artwork. His most recent ones have incorporated different elements as well. And you know, I think also Elias does remind us about this kind of, I mean, the idea of tightrope in itself is this tenuous balance between progress and as well as sustainability, which is really integral to Zoma, the Zoma Museum, which is really a sustainable museum. And yeah, the word museum, I think, we can put in quotes, because it really rethinks the whole concept of what a museum can be in this really beautiful and thoughtful way. And that's in the work as well. You know, he is both an artist and an activist in that regard, really thinking about this impact. And yeah, he said to me too, you know, back in the old days when he would come to New York, you'd see people kissing on the corners, and now instead you see them all looking at their phones. So, there is critique, which is part of it, but there's also really a celebration of what the technology has been able to do. Both in terms of communication, but also in terms of it being this worldwide network that's also an economy as well, and understanding that the value in that. And I just want to ask everyone to talk a little bit about some of the responses that they've had from visitors, because, you know, as we've noted, the materiality of it really comes alive in person. And we tried to convey that in the book through showing details of every single piece, because there's so much about it that has meaning when you see it in person. And again, like when you see it close up, it has one kind of story, and when you step back, it has another story. And he's also bringing together these different modes. So there's pure abstraction, there's figuration, there's landscape. It's like everything is in there, but somehow it flows together seamlessly. So I would love to hear from some of the panelists about the reception of these works.
I think coming from an institution that has at its core a history of abstraction, this was such an exciting exhibition for us to present. I think it touched in a lot of ways in terms of how, you know, some people could come at the work with a little bit of knowledge of that history of painting and really understand it from like a shift in color perspective, shape, pattern, all of those kind of formal qualities we know so well. But I think that it also opened conversations up to architecture. We had a professor from the University of Kansas come in and really talk about how his relationship to the work in studying architecture of Ethiopia really kind of had a poignant impact on him based off of his reception of Elias's work. And he talked about that in a tour to people who were like, I didn't know abstraction could kind of be this way and present itself in a way that, you know, appeals to sensibility of touch and detail and material and things like that. And so, like you said, that sort of micro macro effect of moving up so close to the piece and appreciating the details, but also understanding, you know, like that people who do have exceptional knowledge in programming and technology can look at those things and see almost like a timeline of the technology components revealed in one piece in particular, and not only a timeline, but like a geographic understanding of technology from how it's developed in different regions of the world. And so in one piece you have like it really does appeal to a lot of people. And so I think that it was wonderful to hear people understand the work in those various ways, at least here at the Kemper. So we appreciated that very much.
Yeah, it's definitely a modern timeline of technology. Yeah, we also had some computer scientists come in, and you know, also one thing to remember in terms of the history of Ethiopia was that there is some of the computers were made as part of from Eastern Europe. Some of them are from the West, and those who are in the know could really tease those different aspects out in the components themselves, which was another additional layer of reading into it.
Yeah, and I want to echo what Erin was saying. For us, that was really also so important. It's the fact that people can come and relate to the material. It has a meaning in everybody's life. So the first, you know, there is a moment of just surprise and wonder in seeing the transformation of the material, but still it being recognizable. So there is this, you know, the two elements coexist in his work, and that's really attractive and appealing. And it's also interesting to touch on what Tracy, you were just mentioning, you know, how his work really talks about global connections in terms of trades and waste and other broader ecological concerns. So like in a museum like the ROM, which is a museum of art, culture, nature, this broader ecological connectivity is something that also resonated quite a bit, and that we are still hoping to, we have a Wales exhibition now that also talks about, you know, flows and just the environment in a global sense. And there is still the possibility maybe of doing a program that would bring the two exhibitions together in thinking about these larger flows of materials, commodities, waste, and what that does to the earth we live in.
Teresa, did you have any thoughts?
Well, since the exhibition was only open for 2 weeks, most of what I heard was regret that our audiences were unable to see it. I did hear from a few people who did see it once and wish they could go back and see it again. But I will say one of the reasons that we were really excited to present this exhibition in Akron, and this goes back to what Silvia was saying, is how people understand these materials. They can relate to them. They're things that are in their everyday life, even though they might be the inside of their cell phone or the inside of their computer. And we have our audiences in Akron really respond well to works including found objects, and that was something that I really tried to explore in the chat labels. But in terms of really good comments from our audiences, unfortunately, we just weren't open long enough for me to be able to share those.
And Karen, you had that giant installation that you just shared with us, and I know it opened in October before, 2019. So what were some of the remarks that you heard from audiences?
People are forever, I think, I mean, any place and Wellin, anywhere I've been lucky enough to encounter Elias's work has been sort of just the complete awe at the sheer number of motherboards that he's found. And again, their colors and textures, and to the points that you're all making. I mean, when people start to realize that a certain color is associated with Soviet motherboards and that you can't get them anymore, and that he's sourcing these, and then you start to think about all of that. I mean, you just watch people's eyes get so big. And I mean, I have, because ours is just one piece and not in a broader context, or in a broader context of his work rather, I do actually stand up in the pavilion and challenge people when they come in, can you guess what this is made out of? And it's fun to see all the references that people bring in of, oh, it must be a textile, I think it's yarn, oh, it's rubber bands, how did he put all these rubber bands together? And then when people recognize it as communications technologies, then they're like, but how did he get it over the wood? And then when you start to look at the nails, and if you talk to him about the nails, I mean, they look random, but he's very precise about what kinds of nails he uses. And he hammers them to get a particular kind of reflectivity and sense of motion in the work. And so, I mean, it just, the magic keeps expanding.
Yeah, he said, if I wanted to, I could just make paintings, but I've chosen these materials specifically so that they create a challenge for him in terms of the realization. And yeah, the nails are part of the art itself, and the wires that are braided. These are all components that kind of coalesce to create these incredible compositions. So we have some questions, so I'm just going to lob them to the group, and then we can talk together for another 15 or 20 minutes or so. Okay, what is Sime's reputation globally? Did this exhibition put him on the map, or is the USA just catching up to his work? Yeah, Karen, maybe I'll let you start, because I think you've known about Elias's work maybe the longest of all of us.
Maybe, I'm not sure. I've certainly been a fan of Elias's work for, oh goodness, at least 10 years now. I will say that he had a retrospective in Santa Monica, and I think that was 2010. Tracy, is that?
I think it was a little earlier, but yeah,
Right.
around then.
So yeah, and so he did have a following and has had a following, but what really happened is when he started working with the communications technologies, that became a real breakthrough, much like the bottle caps served as a breakthrough for Ella Natsui, where Elle had a 30-40 year career, had shown at Dakar and the Venice Biennale, but didn't have that sort of everybody's recognition until this moment. And when Elias started working with these components, he and Meski thought hard about how to work with them, where he didn't lend them out one by one. He waited until he had a critical mass of artworks so that they came into the art world as this sort of well-articulated body of work, and they were an immediate sensation. So he had a retrospective with an exhibition in New York, and his work internationally in the art world sense really launched out of New York City, but he has shown around the world, and that both informs his practice, but also, informs his recognition. But in this case, I wouldn't say that the US has lagged behind anywhere. I mean, the US has very much been a platform for Elias's career, but he is very intentional in remaining in Addis Ababa. That is his home, that is what informs his work, and that is where he chooses to live. So he will send his work to New York, and if he has time, he will travel to the States where the exhibition is happening. But the energy, the contemporaneity, the force of his work is coming out of Ethiopia.
Yeah, and it's interesting that show in Santa Monica was such a different show.
Very much more theatrical.
Exactly, and it's exciting to look at, but it's really interesting to think of in this continuum. And the title of the exhibition is Tightrope, but Tightrope is the series that he has been working on since 2010 and is ongoing. So this body of work is really sort of his most mature work. But he has had recognition, but like this book is the first major scholarship, and this is the largest traveling exhibition of his work, and especially focusing on Tightrope. Does anyone else have any response to or want to add anything to that? Okay. How does Elias feel about all of the electronic waste piling up in his country? Silvia, do you want to take that, since I know nature is part of your mandate up there at the Royal Ontario Museum?
Well, I mean, I don't know if he particularly has feelings. I mean, it is part of what he finds in his environment. There is also this very much sense of acknowledgement that this is the reality of things. And if we think about it in, more global terms, many of the metropolis in Africa are some of the biggest electronic waste producers in the world. And that is because, we change our phones every 2 years, and the phones that we change end up on the secondhand market, often in the global south, and they go and die elsewhere. So this is not really what he thinks about, though, when he engages electronic materials. He still very much thinks as a painter. He engages this material as color, but also as significant and material that has been connected to people. But I don't think he's really, focused on the ecological issues in terms of waste as much as we can think of it in looking at the work and in interpreting the work. I mean, I think there's always different layers that one can tease out. But for Elias, the way he engages with electronic, as many of the people on the panel have said, is really on what technology does to the way we connect to one another. And that is really his strongest conceptual tie, and why he thinks working with these materials is significant in his poetics and view.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, it's really a reinvention of the material, like looking at it from a different perspective, seeing the aesthetic potential in it. So the third question, I'm gonna send this to you, Erin, since abstraction is your jams over there. What are the main narratives embedded in Sime's otherwise abstract work?
I think in talking with him, like one of the questions, one of the kind of pointed questions I had for him, I remember in visiting his studio was, these feel so related to landscapes to me, and I kept kind of going back to that, like the swirls, even the tightrope piece that's in the Kemper Museum's collection. It has like this very spanning appeal. It has a connection that looks like as if you're transitioning from a city, like a city wall to a kind of green space or something like that. And I think that, he said, he basically said to me like, okay, yeah. And then kind of explained a little further in terms of not like I'm translating this from one to one, but what he did was then share a story with me about traveling and how he has spent so much time traveling different landscapes. And it made the acknowledgement to me that, when we travel down a road in Ethiopia, it's like this, it's winding, it's very serpentine. And as he was describing that, that connection to the way that he abstracts that form in a lot of his work then becomes much more understandable. And I like the way that he unpacks it that way, instead of saying like, this is a direct representation of kind of like either the modernist grid. I mean, we see all those things in there. There's a grid system. There's like this reference to kind of like shape and form and undulation and kind of and abstracting and change and color. But the method of him coming to these works in the form of telling a broader story really speaks again to our understanding of how these works teeter on the edge of one thing, and then they kind of, reveal themselves as something else, right? And I think that calling this series Tightrope was genius on his part, because it always allows us to be open to these different ideas that are happening. And especially in abstraction, I do think that we're always trying to kind of see something that we relate to in the forms in the forms that come to us. And I think that he does that for us, but in so many different ways. And listening to him speak about his work and the way that he comes to it in a transformative capacity with like, you have this one element, he seeks out these elements, right? These colors, these specific colors that take him decades to find. It's the journey of this kind of unfolding of abstraction that I find quite interesting in his work. And if you ask him a very pointed question, is like, does this relate exactly to this? I think the expectation is that your answer is going to be as winding as those roads that he travels on when he visits places, when he explores the landscapes and things like that. And I love it. And I think that that's where abstraction kind of leads you in a deeper capacity, is that like, you're not, because you don't necessarily have that one-to-one, it cracks something open a little bit more.
And I think that's a wonderful note to end on. So I wanted to thank you all for such a wonderful panel. It was just actually fun to get together and talk about Elias's work and talk about this wonderful exhibition. And just one last plug, if you are in Toronto, please go to the Royal Ontario Museum, see our show, it's still up. And feel free to get our book as well, which has a wonderful essay there it is, by Karen and by Smooth and Zoe. And again, I also want to echo the thanks to Elias and Mesky and to Jim and Jane Cohan, who really helped us bring this fantastic exhibition together. And we're so pleased that it's traveled throughout the country and now in Canada as well. It's so meaningful to all of us. And at this time where we have been remote, to remember that seeing things in person and having that that visceral tactile relationship that happens when you see a work of art in real life is meaningful. So thank you all so much. Have a great day.